Hi, this is the Gardening Guys, Owen and Conway. My name is Conway. Today we're going to do a little bit of introductory about spring bulbs. Generally speaking, right now you start seeing spring flowering bulbs come into a lot of places like garden centers and nurseries and those alike. And usually for spring bulbs right now, now's the time to be thinking about purchasing them and getting ready to get them planted in your garden so that you can get some color in for the springtime. Conversely, anything that is usually flowering in the summertime, you would have to purchase those in the spring. So be aware that there are two different main groups of bulbs that we're looking at. But in this particular case, these are bulbs that basically when we purchase now, they will either flower in the fall, but in most cases right now, they also flower in the early spring. So they must be sort of done earlier on. I should point out right now that when you're picking up bulbs, there's always some very, very interesting information which is on the package that a lot of people should be taking consideration when you're buying bulbs. One of the things you look at right now for is that they will usually tell you sort of.
I finished everything that I need to finish, but I'm heading out, so I'm not sure where you are, so have a good night.
So one of the things that you'll basically look at, you'll come across flowering time. And that flowering time can either be mentioned as being early spring, mid-spring, or late spring. Generally speaking right now for it, if it's early spring, I'm thinking of anything that would be anywhere from, let's say, February-ish to March. Anything which is sort of mid-spring, I'm going to say is sort of April-ish. Anything which is sort of late spring will be probably May onwards, right into early summer, like in June. Generally speaking, you're also looking at right now for it that they will also give you some sort of light exposure in terms of how much light it would basically need. Generally speaking, any particular spring flowering bulb that flowers very early in the season and is usually quite short in height will usually tolerate some degree of less light than we normally would think of. In this particular example, they're basically saying that these particular iris, which are iris bulbs, only grows about 6 inches. This particular one right now normally flowers in about, I would say, early to about mid-March. And this particular one is a particular bulb that if you look on the package right now, further in there right now, they will usually tell you when it can be sort of planted and when you expect it to be flowering. So in this particular case right now, they're indicating the flowers, indicating the months in which it will flower. In this particular case, it's kind of sort of exaggerating right now. Generally, when I'm looking for spring flowering bulbs, you're probably going to look for maybe about 2 weeks worth of flowering time for those particular bulbs whenever you sort of select it. But if you sort of select your bulbs for different flowering times of the year, it is possible with careful selection that you can actually get bulbs that can flower for easily within a 10-week period. As one finishes, another one starts, and then when that finishes, another one starts. So this one also will tell you right now, in the package here right now, how deep you normally should be planting it. You don't quite see it on here right now for it, but usually the smaller the bulb, the less depth we usually put in the ground. The normal rule of thumb right now is we normally take the diameter of the bulb, which is this, and we usually multiply by a factor of, let's say, 3, and it'll give you a rough depth on which is planting. It's not an exact science, but it gives you a rough idea right now. It's very, very important that when we are planting bulbs, your soil must be well drained. If your soil has a tendency of staying moist too long, especially during the winter months, then you'll find that your bulbs, chances are they will not make it through a wet winter right now, which is very prevalent for us here on the West Coast. They will just usually end up rotting. So we take the diameter of that particular bulb and that'll give you a rough depth in which you're planting right now for it. It's just a ballpark thing. You can always plant them a lot more deeper. You may find in some cases if I do plant things a lot more deeper, they might be a little bit more slower to sort of come up if you decide to plant a lot more deeper than that. So we have in here, these are the Dutch iris bulbs. They come in various different colors. Behind me right now, we have some grape hyacinths. These ones, of course, are what I call a no-brainer type one, which is very easy to grow. This is one of the few bulbs that actually will produce leaves, especially now in the fall. And then the leaves will die down, and then they will produce flowers during the springtime. These grape hyacinths predominantly are usually in sort of a purpley color. Look on the other side of it. Snowdrops. or popularity with a lot of people right now, and they multiply very, very readily in right now in the garden. And these particular ones right now have been known to come out quite early as January, but in most cases I'm going to usually say roughly around February. This happens to be a double flowering snowdrop, and they also come as singles. We also have some that are sort of more unusual right now, like some of the anemones, which are really some of the more fancy ones that you may encounter as cut flowers in a florist shop, as opposed to some of the ones which are more daisy-like. I usually find that for most of the ones that are sort of daisy-like, they tend to sort of what we call naturalize or perennialize. In other words, usually in the garden over time, it will tend to sort of multiply over a period of years, as opposed to some of these other ones right now when they're a lot more bigger, fancier flowers, they don't seem to set that well and sort of multiply that readily in the garden. You can also buy bulbs right now, especially at this time of year, in larger packages, which is more of a really good economical buy right now, where you can actually get either mixed colors or maybe separate colors right now, and that actually will give you a longer, more bang for your buck in there right now for it. Another tip: when you are planting bulbs, plant them in groupings. So it's very, very important, rather than planting one here, one here, one here, put them in groupings, maybe 5 or 10. In some cases right now, some people usually like to plant them sort of in like little drifts, and people just kind of sort of throw them in randomly around the garden right now to create this more of this drifting type of effect that you see pictured on this particular diagram here. So is there any comments?
Nope.
So until we hear from you again, go green.